It gives me great pleasure to introduce Chef Robert Del Grande and Chef Elliot Kelly. Both of them are at Cafe Annie in the Galleria restaurant, and they were here last year, and I've personally gotten to know Chef Robert, and he's got a fascinating history. He's got a PhD in biochemistry. He understands salt better than I do, and if you combine that with the skill of cooking, he's a Dr. Chef. And I always tell my wife that I cook, but she doesn't call me chef, so she just calls me doctor. But they're a fantastic duo, and then Angela will kind of guide through certain discussions. If you can come up here, Angela. So, Chef, take it away. Thank you very much for being here for us.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I can tell you why you would like to be called chef. It's very simple. When you're called chef, you don't have to do the dishes. I mean, basically, that's why everyone wants to be chef, because you don't have to do the dishes. So, at my house, sometimes I get away with it. Sometimes I don't get away with it. But anyway, so today, let's see. We have Angela over here, and then because if anyone asks very difficult questions, I'm going to turn this way, and then she's going to get me out of trouble. And then, of course, Elliot Kelly is. I'm ready to cook. He's going to do most of the cooking while I sort of commenting on it. So that's our trio. That's our band for today. And we're going to cover really kind of three main points. Cooking is really about flavor. In other words, how do you develop flavor, and what really is flavor? So we'll talk about how does that work exactly. We're going to talk a little about recipes, and we're going to do one, but sort of how they work and how they're supposed to work to generate flavor. And then the last part will be about how to get great flavor and use no salt at all, which we're going to use none today, only what is natural. Did we bring any salt?
No salt.
We didn't even bring, that's how brave we are. We brought no salt. So we have, we also brought no salt because there's no chance we can make a mistake and put salt in this. So this will have no salt. So let me talk a little bit first about sort of flavor in recipes. And recipes in general are very good at telling you what to do, not necessarily why you're doing it. Do this first, do this second. And when we do this recipe, Elliot is going to be doing the doing part, and I'm going to be talking about why he's doing it. So you go along, 1, 2, 3, it says all sorts of directions of what to do. And I've done this too, so I can be critical about it, is the very last line quite often will say, season to taste. And serve, So season to taste is like they're telling you what to do, and like I'm supposed to fix it, We would always joke that the phrase season to taste means it's your problem now, right? It's not if the recipe didn't work, it's not my problem. I was responsible for 1 through 9. Number 10 is yours. But the reason for that season to taste, and the English language too is really tricky. We were saying, I'm not sure if it means season to your personal preferences, or season to how you like it, or does it mean fix it? I mean, make it right. Generally what it means is that flavor in the end has to have a sense of balance. So it should say balance the aspects of flavor that are there. Unfortunately, it generally means add salt. That's generally what season to taste means. Add salt, add pepper is kind of what it means. And that's where we confuse taste with flavor, and they're two different things. So let me sort of just expand flavor for a second. So there's taste, strictly, gets a little scientific, but is strictly receptors on your palate. So there's ones for salt, ones for sweet, for sour, for bitter, and then for sort of savory, this umami thing. And there might be some other ones because that's how science works. They just keep adding new discoveries to it. So in their most pure form, they have no smell at all. They're just on your palate. The interesting part comes when you add, but on your palate too, before I talk about smell, then there's texture. Potato chips, very uninteresting, good with salt, unfortunately, but it's the crunchy part. You can do without the salt if they're really crunchy, because the crunchiness seems to make up for the absence of it if you have to have salt on them. So there's textural aspect, and then there's smell. which everyone knows is important once you've had a cold. So that adds a lot of, the aromas add a lot to sort of the food, you know. So there's taste, there's texture, there's smell. And then, so where's flavor? Well, it's in your mind. Your mind is assembling all of these things. So it's taking all that input from the receptors in your mouth and the receptors in your nose and putting a flavor together. And so in a way what happens is flavor is taste and texture and smell and what I've now been calling the elements of the mind get added in. Memories particularly. If you have a favorite flavor, it's because you can remember it. It's usually associated with a very happy instance quite often. So we inject it. You know, I love chocolate cake. My mom made chocolate cake on my birthday almost every year when I was little. So it's one of those things that you begin to associate with it. And all sorts of other things. Culture is in your mind too. So we tend to think about how different cuisines and different cultures work, and that's how we make sense out of it. So you can see that the flavors in the mind, and all the data is going there. The phrase I like was that you receive tastes and you perceive flavor. So the perception is sort of in your mind. But there's a lot of pieces there that go into it that your mind's going to assemble. One of them is salt, and if we can't use it at all or added salt, we just have to now begin to rely on the other ones to, it's a good word, intrigue our mind. Not distract it, but intrigue our mind in noticing it's not even there. So that's what we're going to do today. And as Elliot goes along, I'm going to sort of commentate on what he's doing. He's going to begin this recipe by, well, let me tell you about this recipe first. So it's a bunch of to-dos, but it's really a recipe within a recipe within a recipe within a recipe. And it just keeps going, but it's a whole series of recipes. The whole point of it is that I didn't want to show you just one thing that you could do. I want to just open your mind to a dozen possibilities for cooking. So as we go along, we'll mention along the way little other recipes that can parallel alongside that. So Elliot's going to start by first sautéing some onion and garlic. That's what the recipe would say. It'll say stuff like in a medium pan over medium heat. No one ever tells you what medium is, but pan size can often have a lot to do with it, and we'll come back to that. But he's going to saute some onion and garlic. That's what he's going to do. It'll sometimes say for 3 to 4 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that, another kind of thing. But what he's actually going to make happen here as he sautés these onion and garlic is he's going to transform them into these beautiful aromas that we associate with sautéing onions and garlic. And it has nothing to do with taste at all. We're just going to make it smell better right away. That's the first thing we're going to do. And so, people always talk about taste and smell. It's actually the other way around. It's actually smell and taste. You rarely taste anything until, in fact, you can't even taste it before you smell it. Smell is just much faster. A really simple reason. You're breathing. That's what sort of does it. Before you take a bite, you usually take a little breath, and so you smell it right away, and that's what makes food intriguing. So, yeah. And so eventually, they can go that way. So yeah, you start to pick it up, and it is one of the most intoxicating sort of flavors that you would. It's starting to feel. Can you smell it now?
Yeah, I can smell it now.
And so this, if you love organic chemistry, that's an organic chemistry lab in that skillet right now. All sorts of stuff is going on. So we're sort of increasing the aromas as we sort of go. And so that's going to be a big part of it. The better the food smells, the better it will taste. In fact, we'll even get distracted from the fact that there's no salt. Some people would add salt right now to it, but why? We really don't have to. So next, as it goes along, we can sort of let this, oh wait, that's not a pan, that's a cauldron. You want to add the next one, the little bits of pepper and thyme, I think is next. So then here's an herb piece, so he's going to put a little black pepper in with it. And here's an interesting one, that pepper we will associate with the taste bitter, so it has a sort of a bitter taste, and we'll come to this structure of taste. But the one thing about pepper is it really smells. So when they say use fresh ground pepper, if you use stale pepper, it's just as bitter. You just have lost the aromatic. So when you add the pepper, now that's going to bloom even more, and you get more sort of smells to it. And then you're going to add some herbs, some fresh thyme, I think. We're going to end up doing...
We got thyme already.
Add some thyme in it? You put it in already?
Yeah.
Man, he's fast.
Yeah, you smell that?
Yeah. Add a little more thyme. You got more.
You guys smell that?
Yeah.
Good.
So herbs, again, the reason why we use herbs and why they can be very important is they tend to have... Yeah, add more if it's good, add more. That they have a great sense of smell to them. So we're continuing to add the aromatics. You smell the... Whoa. So that's pretty nice, huh?
That whole area of studies,
Yeah.
they call it neurogastronomy. The relation between...
For a moment, I saw the picture of a chicken. Yeah, and then we're going to have chicken, yeah. So it's... And so I love to cook at home, and I have a pretty good stove with a hood over it. It's a fan because chefs are really prone to creating smoke. It's easy on the smoke, just in case. But and my neighborhood said, "You know, we hate it when you cook." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because the whole neighborhood smells good, and we're too embarrassed to come ring the doorbell. Say, can we come over?" So, but it's usually because I'm working on things that sort of smell good. So the next step, let me tell you. When we think about flavor, you tend to think about dimensions and space. Taste, the taste of salt is sort of very kind of linear one. Most tastes sour, more linear. When you put them together, you can create sort of this complexity, right? So I did this sort of fourth grade chemistry. It won't be too, I'm really prone to that sort of academic thing. First slide. So I did this class for fourth grades. I was trying to explain flavor to them. So I said, hey, for example, in terms of space, if salty was that direction, which direction would sweet be? And they all of them pointed the other direction. I said, good, okay, no, that's great. I said, well, let's try another one. What if salty was, that way, or if sweet was that way, which one would sour be? And they said, that way, so they had a sort of opposite. So when you sort of build that up, that if sweet is the opposite of salty, and sour is the opposite of sweet, sour is starting to sound a lot like salty, right? It's kind of in the same category in terms of making a dimension. So the next step we're going to do here is we want to create sort of some tension to it. He's going to add some champagne vinegar, which is the tart aspect to it. Measured it's always important to measure things carefully. Yeah, right. It's more of a feeling. And then he's going to add some, in this case, I love maple syrup, but we could add regular sugar, but maple syrup and mushrooms is it's a woodsy kind of sort of flavor together. So now what we've created is this sort of tension between the two. The tension of sweet and sour is kind of the same as sweet and salty, but we don't have any salt. But we're going to get the same impact on our palate, the same sort of idea. So that's the recipe told him what to do. I'm telling why he's doing it. And you could say, well, what about honey? Sure. And what about red wine vinegar? Or what about a lot of lemon juice? So all of a sudden you start to see this angle that we can use these two together to sort of build these dimensions, right? Always looking for what's opposite. Things like, bitter and sweet also tend to be opposites. You can start to control them by, and back to when it says season to taste, instead of just add salt, now you start thinking a little something sweet and naturally sweet, a little something that would be sour, a little something that's sort of bitter, a little something that might be savory and so forth. And we'll create just as much complexity as before. Okay. The next step, we're going to use mushrooms today, right? You go ahead.
Mushrooms.
Huh?
Yeah, mushrooms.
Go ahead. We'll go with mushrooms.
Ready?
So we're going to do mushrooms, and then we'll talk about all the possibilities. But here's why let me tell you what salt is really good for. And it's probably it's the easy thing to do. When the flavors are very dilute, you add salt. So it seems to make flavors more concentrated. Why does so much processed food have salt in it? Because it pretty much is a little dilute, and so they add the salt and have more impact. You can add salt to a glass of water, and it will have more impact on it. So we're always sort of battling the weak chicken stock, you add salt to it. Or the vegetable doesn't taste as rich as it should, you add salt to it. So just think about this, that when the flavors are kind of dilute, you add salt and they seem to become more concentrated. That's what the effect seems to be. Mushrooms are actually very low in sodium and very high in water.
Right.
Yeah, hardly any sodium?
Hardly any. Any
Hardly
fresh
any.
fruit or vegetables can be very low in sodium.
Very low sodium. So the one reason, so carrots are low sodium, right?
Yep.
So carrots are low sodium. The reason why raw carrots taste so good, because they're crunchy, right? You forget the crunchy part. It's the crunch that you love the sound of. So anyway, what we're doing here, so you think about mushrooms and that they have a lot of water in them. You think about dilute flavors are made more concentrated with salt. What's the opposite to that? What's the opposite to adding salt to make something dilute taste richer? Well, boil off the water, right? Just reduce the water down, and the flavors will get more concentrated. So in these mushrooms here, for example, which really have a lot of water in them, you might be able to see it, kind of the steam is sort of blowing off as they go, and the flavor will start to concentrate. And what's interesting here is that if you just do it a little bit, they'll concentrate slightly, and it's more of a fresh mushroom flavor. As you keep going, it'll get richer, and if you go all the way down, they'll get meaty, almost like a steak by the time they're really, really concentrated. In this case, they're absorbing the sweet and sour mix as it go. Lots of possibilities. But those could be carrots, they could be cauliflower, they could be Brussels sprouts, and almost all vegetables when they're fresh have a lot of water. And so as you slowly cook them, even carrots, I'll do them. So let me tell you why a medium skillet, a large skillet, extra large skillet, super large skillet, small skillet. The bigger the skillet, the more the evaporation. So I'll get those little baby carrots, peel them, and then saute them in a really big pan so they're really spacious. And they slowly evaporate a little bit. They get really concentrated as they go. And then a little touch of vinegar, a little touch of honey, a squeeze of lemon, and there's no salt at all, and they taste great. They just sort of bring their own part together. So let's see. So then, as his recipe goes on, how does it look? Nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would you put it on if you had a choice?
If I had my
Dinner
choice,
tonight. Here's Elliot on dinner tonight. And?
it goes good on chicken, really good. And it goes very well with salmon, even on steak. So
Fish? I think, yeah, salmon, piece of fish, very meaty. Oh, the classic one would be a whitefish, even like a sole-type fish with mushrooms. And what you could do, so this, we're sort of heading towards, it could be a hot vegetable or it could be a salad. It could be any really vegetable in there. But at some point, we could even add a little bit of a broth, sodium-free broth, you know. Got the police over here.
Far reduced sodium broth.
Well, can you talk about that? Because I'm always confused by things like low sodium relative to what?
So that's a really good question. In order for a label to say if it's low sodium, it has to meet a certain standard. I believe it's under 100 milligrams per serving. But the phrase you'll see more commonly is reduced sodium. Well, reduced from what? So it has to meet the standard of it has to have at least 25% less sodium than its original broth per se in this situation. But it's not always the best choice whenever you think about a cup of regular broth that you buy at the grocery store could have 1,000 milligrams of sodium. So you may be going from 1,000 milligrams of sodium per cup to 750 milligrams. Yes, it's less, but we still want to keep an eye on it. I mean, ideally, we're going to be more in like the 100, 200 milligrams of sodium for a stock. And if you're making it at home yourself, it's much easier to do because then you just add all the great herbs and aromatics and you don't have to deal with so much sodium, or the no sodium ones. There are some no salt added broths out there that would be very good too.
Let me tell you how easy this is. And it's just the English language, it's just kind of fun. So, you know what I had this morning when I got up? I had some coffee broth. I made some broth with coffee beans, hot water, and my wife had some tea broth that she made with tea, right? So it's just hot water and stuff. You just put it in there.
Right.
So if you take anything, and a lot of times, if you clean up a vegetable, even the little, like the mushroom stems and so forth, you just put them, cover them with water, put a branch of herbs and peppercorns, and just simmer them for not very long, and it gets pretty flavorful pretty fast. You can do it sort of on your own. I just always say add broth because we always make our own, because they're not only because of the sodium problem, because I know they're making up for the flavor with it. So it's something to think about when you think about a sauce. Do it yourself. It's not hard. But if you can make coffee, you can make a broth. I mean, it's really that easy. Really, really, really easy. But you could turn that, or a splash of cream or something would make a little creamy mushroom sauce. But there's an opportunity there for a sauce to happen. Okay, so then what happens is, and I'm glad that Elliot didn't measure too exactly.
Oh, who cares about that?
Yeah, who cares? And the reason for it is chefs are really good at sort of balancing the flavors at the end. So we usually go full steam ahead belt. I'll fix it later. Don't worry about it. But we never add salt. We never add salt to anything unless it's absolutely, there's some critical thing, but because you could put it at the end. And the other rule of salt is when it goes in, it ain't coming back out. So we usually leave that for the end and use the other flavors sort of first. So we'll go along and say, we'll adjust it at the end. And that's what we mean by season to taste or balance the flavor by taste. The reason for it is, if in this sauteing of the mushroom, we're not exactly how much of the water evaporated, we're not sure how much of the vinegar evaporated, we're not sure how exactly he measured the maple syrup. We're not sure much in terms of what he did. Now the question is to taste it and bring it back into balance. So the season to taste piece is you add salt because it fixes everything. So the next part of this little recipe that you could just blend, this is just as easy. It's a sweet and sour syrup, but it's a broth. You just mix everything together. We're going to kind of parallel the recipe and put the maple syrup and the vinegar. I put a little red chili flake in there. If you like spicy, not spicy is a good thing sometimes. It gives you a little more mouth sort of presence. What else in there? Fresh thyme, black pepper. So we just mix it all together. And then that becomes our season to taste liquid, right? So now we can taste it. It's not quite right. You add a little bit more and it brings sort of everything together. So I just like that picture of saying it used to be add salt, that'll fix it, to now, no, let's look at the other elements of taste and smell. Anytime you add smell, it's going to sort of taste better to it. It also turns out that if you roasted a chicken without any salt, but herbs and pepper and so forth, you could use something like that, and you have the option to use any type of sweet or sour that you would like. So that's how we want to get to think about the last line of the recipe should be balance the flavors without using any salt, and to use all those resources of. So let me back up one point, because the reason why sometimes you have to season the taste at the end and sort of has to sort of fix it is that we missed a point along the way, like you should have browned those mushrooms more. Oh, I should have added more aroma here. It's hard to add smell to the food at the end. Usually the aromas are coming from the beginning, so you have to think along the way, and then you can adjust it at the last part. So, all this makes sort of sense? Do you all think you have any questions, not for me, but for Angela? No? Don't ask me any questions. Any questions at all? Anything you think? Yes?
Two-part question. What kind of oil did you use? Did you use olive oil or?
Yeah, that's extra virgin olive oil, good olive oil. All of them work. So pretty much peanut oil would be the most neutral one with the highest burning point you can saute, least expensive. Olive oil, not adding much flavor. Olive oil adding more flavor, certainly. At that level versus the really wildly expensive finishing ones. Other ones which are also really good for flavor, like walnut oil or hazelnut oil or sesame oil is okay, right?
But they have lower smoke points.
Yeah, sometimes with ingredients that we associate with Asian cooking, sometimes like seasoned rice vinegar have a lot of sodium. You just have to sometimes read it kind of carefully in the smaller print. But those are very flavorful, so if you add toasted sesame oil, you'll get a huge flavor.
I've heard, maybe I'm wrong, but with olive oil, you don't add it until the end when you're sautéing because it burns off, or the smoke points. I'm not sure. You're not supposed to put it in at the very start.
So it all depends for me, my personal opinion, which is the right one. My opinion is that it all depends where the oil is going to end up. So if I'm going to sear a steak and then throw the oil away, then I will use just a plain olive oil, not an extra virgin olive oil, because I'm not going to use any or peanut oil or something. If it's going to become part of the dish and I'm not actually going to burn it, so a lot of people said, oh, don't use extra virgin olive oil, you'll destroy the oil. All depends how hot you cook it, but this was not that hot, and it's incorporated with the mushroom, so I kind of want the quality to be higher. The problem with like just plain olive oil is that it's fairly highly processed stuff. So it used to be, now they sort of expanded it where you can buy, reasonably good extra virgin olive oil that's not very expensive, and you're not cooking with that much with it. But it's the burning part that's the problem. So butter, because it's burned the fastest, not even the milk solids, but the butter itself will burn fast, than the higher smoke point ones. But usually if the oil is going to smoke, it means you're trying to really caramelize something that has a high cooking temperature like a steak, and you're probably going to throw it away anyway. You don't want it, because when the oil is smoking, it's breaking down.
Right.
I mean,
And that there are some studies that say that once it passes that smoke point and it starts to break down, it could potentially be carcinogistic, but it also won't taste very good once it passes that smoke point. So I always say on medium heat, like what Elliot was doing today, the olive oil is okay. If you're going to if you're going to marinate something to grill, or if you're going to roast something at a very high temperature in your oven, then you need to look at something other than the olive oil, because that's a little bit above its smoke point.
yeah, and the language too is tricky, is that there's kind of a bitter, and there's acrid. So acrid would be burning oil, not so good, But I usually, if I'm going to make a mistake, I choose the slightly better one. I just use the higher level one. But olive oils now, that it used to be fairly narrow. Now the price range is wide because I think the technology is better and the flavor's better. It's a good question, though. Yes?
So when you use peanut oil, does allergy concern you at all?
I don't have a peanut allergy, so it doesn't bother me. But now we're talking that unless you're aware of something, so like if you don't have a sodium problem, you never read the labels, you never look at anything, then somebody makes you aware of it. So at the restaurant, we used to use peanut oil, now we don't use any. We use soybean oil to just take all. We had some people who would come in who love French fries. Could you make us a batch on the side from soybean oil? So we'd have to make, then we just decided to change all of it, so it wasn't worth but and I don't know no, so we don't use, we have any peanut oil anymore?
No more peanut oil.
We don't have any at all. So with a lot of things, it's really, you just can't mix high sodium and no sodium things on the same shelf. You can't mix things with gluten and no gluten on the same shelf. They have to kind of just be separate because in the rush. So we got rid of the peanut oil, just like someone would say, I'm really allergic, I can't eat peanut oil. And then you have to stop and think about the whole recipe from start to finish. And the restaurant problem is that generally one person didn't do the whole thing. So the prep started with these guys who then said, oh, can I have the chicken stock? I didn't make the chicken stock. Somebody else would have made it.
Do you think peanut oil makes catfish taste better? I'm from Louisiana.
I was going to say, ask someone from Louisiana. They'll tell you for sure. Well, it's like making roux, too, what the oil would be. But I think you have to have it on what you have on hand. But it's definitely a cooking oil. You wouldn't use it to finish sort of something. But and getting the temperature right, but I think. The one, you brought up a good point. So I think those are the I'll be real polite now, but let's see. Those that look to me the most insecure use the most salt. You know, that's what I think. I'm not really sure, so they give it a lot of salt. You know. So I'm going to use less salt now, so I look more confident, I think. That's my plan.
Okay. What is the difference between the extra virgin olive oil and the light olive oil? Because I tend to like the light olive oil because it doesn't have that strong flavor. And I just wanted to know what's the difference.
I'm sorry, that's an essay question. That's like a 24-page essay question. The whole olive oil, it's a very broad industry. Farming practices, types of trees, all the olives are different. The ripeness of the olives, so you're going to get these very dark green, very peppery, very strong olive oils. You'll get then other varieties and so forth, and the ripeness level, very lighter ones in terms of not quite so peppery and sort of mild. So it's really just, it's like, for me, what's the difference in a white wine and a red wine besides the color? But you'll have olive oils more like a white wine and olive oils more like a red one. Depends on the use. We for a while were kind of olive oil kind of crazy, that we had to have one we thought was perfect with fish and only for fish, and this olive was perfect for beef, only for beef. Then one olive oil that was perfect for ribeye, and another one that was perfect with filet. We got a little crazy, but we were dreaming most of it, I think. But that's the broad part of it, is that the richness and ripeness and type of the olive and the amount of bite that they have. So you just sort of pick, and so then the other one, they have some that they call more fragrant, more floral olive oil, ones that are more meaty. It's just like wine or other things. It's a natural product that has lots of different, I don't know how many species of olives there are, but there are a lot of them. So.
Well, and I would say too, from a nutritional perspective, we like olive oil, we know it's healthy for you, but even no matter the variety of olive or no matter the taste, the nutritional value stays the same. It's really just a flavor difference in those.
Mostly with the type of, if you go to the olive oil, the olive counter, like at a grocery store, something like those olive bars, you know, they got little teeny ones, great big ones, mildly green, really dark green. They're all just different varieties. There's some processing bits too that come with it, but it's a style. It's more style than one better than the other.
What is a good salt substitute for heart failure patients, and what is it made of?
I thought the good salt substitute was none, but are you going to answer that question?
So, I mean, absolutely. I think it somewhat depends on how you want to use the salt. We always want to steer you towards those salt-free seasonings, like Mrs. Dash, that comes in a variety of flavors. So sometimes the garlic and herb is good for one, the spicy is good for another dish. But we always want to steer you towards those salt-free alternatives. There is something called like the no salt, that's the potassium salt instead of the chloride salt. For some people, they like that, and that's okay. We just want to make sure that if you are using the potassium chloride instead of the sodium chloride salt, we want to make sure you don't have any kidney disease, you don't have any renal problems, because that could become a problem there. But if you still feel like you need a little something that, you know, that everything else can't give you, the potassium chloride would be okay, the no salt product.
Yeah, I think another thing to keep in mind is if you have heart failure and you're on some of the medications, they actually can make your potassium go up. So you want to be careful in using the potassium substitutes and adjust it, because you are taking potassium supplements sometimes for the diuretics, and a couple other medicines can push it up. So that will be the only caution to keep in mind.
I think it's interesting to still to think about. So history of American cooking, I think this is a really broad general statement, but why not, right? Is tended to be very salt-centric in terms of the lead seasoning sort of agent. Then you look to other cultures, you'll notice how much vinegar they use and how much other things. So you'll notice in Mexican cooking, for example, the tradition is you're going to squeeze the lime on it. We're going to put the lime even on the taco. It said, so why do you put, what's the lime for? It makes it brighter, you know, and the flavors seem to stand out more. I thought salt made flavors stand out more. Well, no, lime does too. So all of a sudden then you realize I used to put salt on my taco, now I put lime instead. Now, as I say, the flavor is in your mind, and so it sometimes I like this big, broad statement. This is really kind of broad, but most people's mind are reluctant to give up their favorite thing. When you give your mind a new favorite thing, it doesn't want to give up the old one. It's just going to stick to that. So sometimes you have to say, yeah, I used to put salt on it. Now I put lime on it. It's my new favorite thing. Took a while to kind of get there. There's a transition bridge for the moment. But so you have to kind of think of it that way too. But I like to expand it to think a little more aroma. So the one that we've borrowed from Mexican culture, which, because we'd see it everywhere and then finally figured it out, was that whatever the dish is, doesn't matter. Pick whatever you want, I don't care, whatever it is. Then there's a bowl of chopped white onions, cilantro, serrano chili, and lime juice, And they don't put any salt in it, really. No. And it just sort of sits there, and then everyone's eating, and a little spoonful goes in. And if you think about it for a second, white onion, particularly white, because it's a mild one, not only is it crunchy, but I would describe it as minerally. It has a mineral kind of flavor without the salts. Minerally being like a mineral, like stony sort of. Cilantro being very flowery. The serrano chili being sort of spicy with little bitter edges. So then you have the little sweetness, crunchy, minerally, onion, the sweet, flowery cilantro. And so all of a sudden now that those are the things, without any salt at all, that are making the flavors kind of evolve. So you'll see it in every other culture too. We talked about Tabasco a little bit, but when you're adding Tabasco, you're adding spice and vinegar, maybe a touch of salt. Yeah. But they got so much spice, I don't think you can drink it, hopefully. But so those are things, again, that if you think of them not from a salt aspect, but they're expanding the space of the flavor with spicy against sweet, against sour, against bitter, and that's just on your palate. Then you expand all the pieces in your nose. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's that's just my broad general thought,
Well, that's the point. We want your food to have flavor. We want your food to have a lot of great flavor. We just don't want that flavor coming from a lot of salt. That's the bottom line, is we don't want you to eat cardboard and feel like this is terrible. We want your food to have a lot of flavor. We just don't want it. We're trying to give you ideas to replace those flavors, replace salt for other great flavors.
Yeah, and I mean this in the nicest way, and back to the TV thing, that we would sometimes say the cook that uses a lot of salt kind of lazy, because you just put it in there. It takes a little more dedication to bring the other flavors up, but so the best dish should have the least amount of salt because it took the most skill to sort of do it. The big handful of salt. I don't know what else to do, so put a handful. It doesn't taste right, but a handful of salt. So again, you have to kind of get your mind thinking other levels.
Well, it's very important for the patient to talk about it. Watch restaurants go, because some chefs have a very heavy hand with salt, and he goes home and the next morning he's getting at least 4 pounds of water, and that's the truth.
Yeah, no, that I think that, as we were saying earlier, that for example, as a side one, to cook, because I know a lot about this, is that to cook, you really can't cook gluten-free food if you don't really understand the consequences of how it works. You're just, if you said, if I'm very allergic to gluten and I eat this, I'll get really sick. Boy, you look at the fine print. You do sort of stuff. So if someone does not have a problem with salt and is used to doing it, if you say, or low salt, I used to put a handful. You mean just a half a handful? But if they don't fully understand the problem, if they've never eaten and gone to bed and woke up getting 4 pounds of fluid, then it changes your mind. Then you realize, wow, I didn't think about it that way. So in restaurants, it's very difficult, and why I tell everyone this is just.
They should add a course, in culinary school, about salt.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah, and even in restaurants, it's.
An aging group now, the older aged people, they're the ones that go out and eat.
It has to be even from top to bottom. The waiter communicates to this person, to that person. Like I always say with Well, with anything, and it's got worse these days because you can't tell if someone has an allergy, they just don't like it. So they'll say, no garlic. You know, I can't have garlic, and we have to say, are you really allergic, or you just don't like it, or because then you have to stop everything and think about it. But the message seems to decay as it goes further to the back, towards the kitchen, to who. So the chef sees it says no salt and orders a fish no salt, and he thought I said no sauce, not no salt, no sauce, no salt, whatever. And it just gets confusing, or and things are flying everywhere. So it's a much more. It should seem so simple. I call it, the image I always have in my mind when I check my bags at the airport. It goes down a thing, and I'm flying 2,000 miles, and that bag's going to get there, right? And who knows what happens down there? But it's kind of like in kitchens; it's going everywhere. So it's good point to bring up with the culinary school. So
Yeah. Question?
yeah, no, that's the problem. Yeah. Question?
Okay, on TV shows, you watch all these cooks that they say they're so-called chefs. They always use salt. If I was to come eat, let's say, the rabbit at your restaurant, how much salt would be in it?
There could be none if you want none, because we barely salt anything before we do it. And even things we're about to cook, we could salt a steak and sear it, or if it said no salt, we don't put any salt on it. Doesn't matter what it is. So we just do it at the end because it's the hardest thing to undo. If you marinate something in olive oil and then you don't want olive oil, you can pretty much get rid of the olive oil and marinate it in sesame oil if you want. It's not as hard, but the salt is going to be there. So.
Quick question. Would you prefer savory or sweet for a puff pastry?
So it's a great question because sweet applications tend to be much more narrow, and savory is a really broad field. I never find it interesting to have any one without the other. So to have even something that's very savory without a slightly sweet element is not as interesting because the space kind of contracts. And savory things, sweet things, you always want a little something savory. You see it more now a little bit to kind of, I think like what makes, so if you make a brownie, it'd be a sweet sort of item, although cocoa will have a little kind of a bitter edge. But the walnuts definitely are sort of a savory flavor, and that's kind of the mix between the two. So I always try to balance the two of them together to make it more interesting, I think, The reason why I mentioned is I did a cooking class in Japan on the savory uses of California figs, of all things. Also very good, also very low in sodium. So here's, we were talking about this earlier. So dried figs, California dried figs, which are you'd have to get them from California because from outside the country, you're not sure exactly what happened to them, which is cautious. And if they have maybe minor amounts of sodium, minor. But you eat one, and it's very tasty. And there's no signal in your mind that says, I need to put salt on that. So I think, why? Because it's a great sweet and savory blend going on there at the same time. It has some sweetness, it has some acidity, it has some bitter elements, and so the mind is sort of satisfied. So I thought that could be a model for cooking, that you want to emulate the fresh things that seem to be good on their own, and why are they good on their own without things. So as soon as something needs salt, you start to say, well, I wonder why it needs it in the first place. So that's how, but anyway, so I did this thing in Tokyo, and they had no idea what savory, it couldn't be translated in Japanese, which turned out to be the craziest thing that we had to, but I think they taught them, the funny part is they taught them the English word savory because it was faster than teaching me Japan. In Japanese, that was the funny part. But so the same idea is that things that taste good without any salt already have a sweet, savory blend to them. Good. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Yes?
What kind of vinegar is that?
That's champagne vinegar. Yeah. Any white, Any of the white wine or red wine vinegars are good. You have the distilled white vinegar, which is fine. I think it's just vinegar. They just distill it off so they get the acetic acid out of it. But there's quite a variety, and the flavored ones are quite good too. I think
Right, but like Chef was saying, he thought about maybe trying this recipe with the seasoned rice vinegar, and then he looked at the label. If you see the word seasoned, that should be maybe a first clue, but that vinegar in particular is very high in sodium. But if it's just a plain balsamic, a plain champagne vinegar, those are naturally going to have virtually no sodium. But do just double check your label and stay away from the ones that say seasoned. We don't want seasoned, we want just the vinegar.
You know, in balsamic vinegar, in the Italian tradition, the American one is that we tended to use it as a vinegar in dressings. The more aged Italian one, they use it as a season to taste. You'll put it over your food at the end, little drops, because it's quite, someone told me, well, in Italy, balsamic is kind of our Tabasco sauce. You know, you add a little at the end. But again, it's a very savory, sweet, acidic, aromatic thing that just adds a little boost to the food. It's good. I use it quite a bit too.
Okay.
A little drop here and there, and it's very, very good.
And I think we have a recipe for what Dr. Chef cooked.
And then we can taste. You're welcome to come down and taste the samples. Elliot would plate them up. Be sure you season to taste, though, right? So if you all want to try the mushrooms, you can try the mushrooms. I recommend if you don't like mushrooms to try them.
Yeah, but thank you, both of you, for a wonderful presentation. And again, I think I always enjoy
Thank you.
Chef Elliot
Thank
and
Elliot over there for doing the.
Chef Robert. And in fact, it was aptly pointed out that, the low sodium cooking is not easy, and he's taken it as a challenge, and we're grateful.